Good morning, everyone. You look so beautiful. Thank you for being here. I'm Andre Dowell. I'm the Chief Programming Officer for the Sphinx organization. So happy to have this conversation with all of you and our amazing panelists this morning. We're going to get right into things pretty quickly so we can have a really good discussion here. Immediately to my left, we have Sengupta, who's with Carnegie Hall. Thank you for being here with us. We have Charlotte Lee with Primo Artists and Mark Wilson with the Zoellner Art Center to have a lively discussion about the interplay between artists, curating, programming, and how we can really shape the world, classical music, and how we do things with programming and reaching different audiences too. I want to get right into the discussion with Ab and just talk about the history of Carnegie Hall, really, and the interplay that you have and kind of honoring Carnegie's legacy and what people know of Carnegie Hall. And as the director of artistic planning, how do you balance that shift between the tradition of Carnegie Hall and really trying to have innovative programming and have people come in and express themselves in such a way? And what kind of programming are you looking at when you're doing that with artists and presenters?
Thank you.
We have a mic with... Yeah.
Here we are. Thanks, Andre. It's great to be here. And welcome to everybody. It's a terrific question, and I think for us, the first thing is to really understand what our tradition, what our history, what our legacy actually is. And one of the things that I think Carnegie Hall is, of course, associated with and known for in our community of classical musicians is the great traditions of orchestras and pianists. And I mean, Tchaikovsky opened Carnegie Hall in 1891. But when Andrew Carnegie laid the cornerstone of the building, he said, "May all causes find here a platform." And Carnegie Hall has presented throughout its history all kinds of music. And early on, it was really a place that was for visiting promoters. So they would rent the building and they would present things. And it wasn't a nonprofit presenter the way it is today. That happened when the building was saved by a whole community of artists and music lovers in the 1960s. After Lincoln Center was built, Carnegie Hall was actually slated for demolition. So because of that, there's been all kinds of music that has been heard at Carnegie Hall. And early on, we were the place where black performers were performing when they couldn't find a platform elsewhere. So Ciceretta Jones, James Reese Europe's Clef Club Orchestra. So all of that is a very important part of our tradition and history. And so we think about how can we honor that. You asked specifically about classical music, and for us, we think about, now that we are a presenter, we often talk to each other about the building sort of and the institution behaving like a human being, like an artist. And so the most important thing for us is, really making sure that everybody in our community feels welcome in the building. Isaac Stern used to call it the people's house. And so we think about our programs in such a way that we hope will reach everybody in New York, not just the classical music cognoscenti and the avid concert goers, but everybody will find something that hopefully will spark their interest. We have a couple of different programmatic pillars. We do an annual festival that we call our citywide festival, because whatever the topic of the festival is, we invite partner organizations of all disciplines, not just music organizations, to also take part in the festival. And we actually pull in all of those events into a big marketing campaign. So we're not only promoting our events, but we're promoting the partner events as well. So it's a citywide festival. And so, by doing that, we hope that we'll cut through the noise of, everything that we get bombarded by, so that people really get a sense that, that culture, musical culture, is relevant to their lives. It's addressing things that are on all of our minds. So, as an example, a couple of years ago, the annual festival was Afrofuturism. And it was to center and celebrate and honor this very important aesthetic movement that has really been, it's not a nascent movement. It's a very well-developed movement that's been around since at least the 50s and 60s. And And when we have a festival like that, we try to get all the different kinds of music that are heard at classical in Carnegie Hall to be connected to that festival. Even if sometimes there may be a topic that isn't such a classical music heavy festival. So that one, we did have some classical music. The International Contemporary Ensemble and George Lewis I did a program that was part of that festival. Last year, our festival was much more heavily leaning towards classical music because it was a festival that looked at the rise and fall of the Weimar Republic, and very intentionally a festival that we put in an election year. And so that was a very orchestral heavy festival. And it was a lot of music that you see on orchestra programs normally, but because of the way we contextualized it, we hope that it gave those concerts and that repertoire a kind of relevance and meaning for what was on everybody's minds last year, which was the election in our country. So that's just a little bit of my knee-jerk response to your question. And in terms of how the sort of nuts and bolts of how we do that, we do a lot of conversation in our artistic planning team, and we talk about the issues and ideas that we feel are really important in the world today, and we think about what could a festival of music look like if it were to address, because not every topic is going to be something that we can really ably respond to. And then once that happens, we have conversations with artists and ensembles all over the world, and a picture starts to come together of how we can articulate our thoughts around that. And then we fill in the blanks with invitations to people to think about. There might be an orchestra that we've been talking about coming, and we say, look, this is a topic that's very important to us. Is there something you think you could do that would connect to that? And then we work very closely with curators and other academics and writers and artists to make sure that what we're doing is really authentic. So for the Afrofuturism Festival, for example, it wasn't just us reading a couple of books and trying to put a festival together. We brought in some of the world's leading experts on Afrofuturism to educate us and to really give them the platform to help us curate this festival. So the programs have that connection to the community, because these might be experts, but they're a member of the community, right? So they feel that sense of ownership of what's happening on stage, and I think that hopefully finds a way of connecting to audiences in a very meaningful way.
Thank you. We'll come back to it in a minute, but I'm gonna put a pin in it right now to where you can talk about how Carnegie defines community. Who is your community? And does the community know who they are? We'll come back to that in a second, but I want to get to Charlotte, who sits in an intersection with artist managers.
Bravo.
And also promoting artists and representing them. Social media, you have a lot of PR firm and everything. But I want to talk about when you're presenting artists and talking to presenters and your artists, how do you lead your artists and have conversations with them about what's personal, and how do you market that to them so that it can be communicated to different audiences? Like Carnegie, we talk about community. Communities are different wherever you go. How do you do that with your artists and have that conversation?
Thanks, Andre. Great to see everyone here and to be back. I think it's a really different view that we have as artist managers, because Ab's view and Mark's view is as presenters, to be culturally relevant and to provoke and to draw in. For artists, being on the management side, we want to support that. But we also want to ensure that we're setting up our artists for success, and that's our role. So with that perspective, we want to be sensitive to being culturally relevant. We want to draw in audiences, and we want to make sure that the repertoire sets our artists up in a position where they can be at their best. So, for instance, Randall Gooseby, who we manage, he was recently with the Boston Symphony for his debut, and we had the opportunity to really control the repertoire because the Boston Symphony programming department said, this is his debut. It's not in Tanglewood. It's on subscription downtown. We want him to be shining in the best way. What do you think would set him up for that? And right now, Randall is touring Florence Price Violin Concerto No. 2. He's playing it next week with Cincinnati Symphony and Christian Mechelaru, and that's a composer he feels really passionately about. He made his debut on Decca Records on that composer. In this instance in Boston, we wanted to introduce him on mainstream repertoire that would draw audiences in, that would be attractive from a sales point of view, but also from a core classical point of view. So the piece that he's performed for most of his life, that he knows the best, that he also recorded for his second Decca album, is Brook Concerto. So we went conservative, and there was a great amount of people there. It brought audiences in. He felt really comfortable with it, and he gained a strong rapport with the orchestra and their music director, Andres Nelsons. So that's for a soloist. With regard to conductors, and we have several conductors on our roster, music directors of various orchestras around the world, it's really important to keep all these elements in mind, but they have to be the ones to shape the entire program. A lot of times they will always cater to the artist who is the guest soloist for the program, and they'll say, well, what would you like to play? And then I can see how I can fit a program around that. And James Gaffigan, who was just 2 weeks ago with the San Francisco Symphony, as he was shaping his subscription week, said, all right, so the soloist is Ray Chen. So that's one important element. Any presenter and conductor is going to want a star soloist to bring in followers and audience. So that was a check on our list. What would you like to play, Ray? He said, well, I could play Sibelius, or I could play Barber, or I could play La Sinfonia Española. And James, being an American conductor, the former associate conductor of this very orchestra, San Francisco Symphony, which is an iconic American orchestra, said, well, we have to do the Barber. That is the most popular violin concerto by an American composer, so let's build a program around that. So what to put on the first half? He could have done anything from Joan Tower to George Gershwin to Leonard Bernstein, and he chose Missy Mazzoli because he said, this is culturally relevant, and we have an opportunity to have a living female composer who's terrific. So he chose Sinfonia for Orbiting Spheres to open that program to be a foil to the Barber. So all-American program, but Barber, even though it's the most popular violin concerto in American repertoire, may not be the Beethoven violin concerto or the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, and many people may not know Missy Mazzoli. So what do you program in the second half to get people in? A barnstormer like Prokofiev 5. So that's what he chose for the second half of the program, and it was a rousing ending and success. It brought the house down, and it really gave the audience an experience that was different from the very kind of lyrical, sphere-like beginning of the program with the Missy Mazzoli to this thrilling, terrifying second half. So we work closely with our artists, especially our conductors, to help shape a wholesome program that gives everyone what they want to come into the audience. The presenters are happy. There's a big name soloist. And then there's also opportunities when it's not a big name soloist to have a rising star, an emerging artist, and then to balance the program in other ways, because we want to take advantage of these opportunities to introduce new talent as well as composers.
I'm curious, when you're working with the artists, if you could talk about any type of pushback that you might receive for people who want to stay authentic to themselves, but you also have to market them and push them to venues. Is there ever any pushback, or is it really a collaboration? Can you talk about that just a little bit?
There's pushback from our artists, and there's pushback from presenters. Everyone has their own priorities. As artist managers, our goal is to find the common middle ground. so that everyone's happy. There's a program that one of our conductors has proposed to an orchestra that's a bit unconventional in that it has 4 pieces on it. And how do you feel about 4-piece programs? It's a very controversial topic. It's like, well, you can't have a 45-minute symphony. You have like 2 18 to 23-minute pieces on the second half, and is that really going to bring that big epic impact? So there's pushback oftentimes, and then you have to find a mainstream piece like De Rosenkavalier that's 21 minutes, and it's not going to be Sibelius 2, but it is something that people would want to come to see, and you really have to see it in the larger view. You know, is this a music director at an orchestra that has been slowly building the trust with the community and the patrons that the audience would say, you know what, this is not a program I would have normally bought, but I'm really starting to trust this institution's programming, and I'm just going to have an open mind. That's always the goal, that an audience would be willing to go with an adventuresome program, even if they don't really get it on paper.
Thank you. Mark, you sit at an intersection with universities and a larger community, and there's a lot of balance and interplay with that. I'm wondering if you can talk about, as a presenter, the interplay between community, the university, the overlap, and how you can keep the audience engaged.
Thank you. So at Zoellner, we are a multidisciplinary art center. So we do classical music, we do dance, we do contemporary circus, we do a lot of arts and technology. And so our programming brings in a wide variety of audience members. And we're on a university campus, so we are a university presenter. So that does mean that we do have the majority of our folks are from the community, but we also have our campus stakeholders. And my funding comes from the university, so therefore we have to actually understand that balance between both. So I guess one example I'll give you is a couple of years ago, we brought in the New York Philharmonic to do a performance. They performed Florence Price's symphony as what they did, but we also asked them to come in earlier with some of their members to do some workshops, and so they did. And so what we had them do is they came in and they did a workshop, and they brought folks from different sections, and they broke up our folks across our space, and they worked with the folks in our university orchestra ahead of time. And after they did that individual sectionals, and they came back together on the stage, and we brought in 800 high school students from around the area to actually then hear our students play with some members from the New York Philharmonic as part of this masterclass for those students. And so the university students, it was like, they said, wow, it was like such a big audience of all these high school students who were so engaged to actually listen to our students and also hear these professionals from the New York Philharmonic work with them. And then that was the day before, so then all those high school students, our university students, they were telling all their friends, and that was how we were able to get more of those university students to then come fill up the last bits of that concert with the New York Phil. So we always save tickets for students, and they always get free tickets to some of the shows. So we have to really think creatively about how we engage both the community and also our university students. And so we don't try to defend my team, we talked about defending a broken system. There are a lot of arts things that people do because that's the way everyone's always done it. And so we said, why? And so we try to figure out how can we do something that's a little bit different. So we start bringing other things in. So we brought a Taka quartet. They performed outside. So our university students who might not normally hear classical music, they all stopped. They started bringing their picnic blankets and actually started listening to a Taka quartet. And they're like going, wow, I never even knew classical music. I'm like, yes, because you're at a university and it's our job to educate you. And so that was part of the things that we started to do for our students. They start to trust us. We also start bringing programming in just weird places because we know the experience is something that's important. And when you can give someone an experience that they can't get like in a normal concert hall, then they want to come. And you also make it very small or exclusive. So one other thing I was to share was that we brought a group in called Kick-Ass, a contemporary circus. And we had, yes, that is their name. They're from Quebec. And that program, we brought in a bunch of elementary students to see this show. It's a food truck that they actually perform outdoors. And then we brought them in front of our engineering building, and then the engineering, we partnered with them. And it was great because then they gave those students a tour inside this engineering building. Those students who were also majors in engineering came because they gave those tours. And then students were coming through classes. They were late to the next class because this is really cool. I never seen a circ outside on a food truck. And so we just think we have to be more creative in what we're doing. And so then we actually asked our students, when they are creating their ensembles, don't think just inside the building. Why are we defending the building? If you want to engage with people on the campus, go where they are. If you want to connect with the community, go where they are. So we invite our students to go to churches and other things too, to bring their music out to the community.
As presenters, both of you have said the word community. You've talked about partnering with other outside organizations. We'll start with you, Mark, and then we'll come over here. Can you define who is your community for you, and then how do you look for those partnerships with outside venues or affinity groups or however you define it?
Yeah, our community, we're part of Lehigh Valley, so we're the third largest metropolitan area in Pennsylvania, and we are urban, suburban, rural area. And so I always told people when I came there, we have a unique opportunity to bring people from this vastly different geographic area, vastly different culture area. We have a very large Puerto Rican population on the south side of Lehigh, where we are Lehigh University, and also people from different economic backgrounds. Prior to my arrival, our community were people who had power, wealth, and influence. That's who came to our shows because we defended the stage of having people inside. When I arrived, I said, what is community? Was the question I asked, and I said, is Zoellner just a building? And so when I saw that we had a large Puerto Rican community in the south side, they were not coming into our doors because they were locked out. And so we had to figure out what could we do to really engage with the folks who are just right across the street from us. So we started to think about just that fullness of our community. So we want to represent everyone in our community. So it's not just the folks who can afford tickets. So we started changing some of the programming to actually have free programs other places too. So and that was part of our exploration, is that do we actually represent the Lehigh Valley? And if we look at the demographics, are those the people who are coming to our place? And then when we started to discuss and we saw that in our numbers, no, it wasn't. So then we made a concerted effort to really figure out ways to do that. And part of that discussion was actually going into the community, talking with people, asking them what they thought about us. And actually what we started talking about was actually having a reciprocal exchange of knowledge, whereas not us as a university telling them what they should do or what we can give them, but actually talking back and forth about how we can learn from them, how they can learn from us, and how we can work together. And so that actually changed the paradigm of who our community is now. So we actually have a big, broad range of folks, from both young folks, we have a family series now, school folks, we now have over 8,500 kids who are coming through our doors. Before we weren't having that many kids. And we have folks who've always been here. So we actually, what we try to do is just enlarge the pie of who come through our doors.
I'm curious, you have 3 different venues at Carnegie, but you also partner with other outside organizations. How does Carnegie define community, and what does it look like for you in terms of artists who come in? Are you looking for artists who fit that community, or are they bringing something new to what you're doing and learning and presenting to your audiences?
That's a great question. I think for Carnegie, it's really a question of sort of aperture. And so, at the widest aperture, our community is literally the world. And the narrowest, it can be, people in the justice system or people in therapeutic spaces, right? And so for us, we are constantly trying to work on as many different fronts as possible, so that we are connecting with and reaching people in those communities. Because we believe, I think everybody here believes, that music has the power to uplift and transform people. And I think we all would agree that everyone has the right to experience music. So for us, it can look like, taking artists into Sing Sing, which we do on a regular basis, to work with the men incarcerated there. And there's an extraordinary story of somebody who was in Sing Sing for murder, and through the programs of Carnegie Hall, found their creative voice and making music helped rehabilitate this individual. He was released on parole. He's an extraordinary artist, and he's really turned his life around. He's got his college degrees. He's on faculty now. I forget which university, crafting programs to help people interact with the justice system. So that's an important, part of the community. We take the music that happens at Carnegie Hall into every borough, all 5 boroughs of New York, to community centers, to parks, to outdoor venues, to churches. That's an important part of our community. The community of artists are important. The diplomatic community, which is significant in New York, is another community that we work very closely with, whether it's for fundraising and awareness concerts for what's been happening in Ukraine, or for we have some mini focuses. For example, in the fall we did a focus on the Czech Republic, because 2024 the Czech Republic celebrated the Year of Czech Music, which is something they do on the 4th year of every decade, because it's just a coincidence that the number 4 figures into the birth or death years of the significant Czech composers. So we worked with the diplomatic community from the Czech Republic to bring the Czech Philharmonic for 3 concerts, the Czech Philharmonic Choir, and they were in residence for a week in New York, doing all kinds of concerts and educational projects, interfacing with the diasporic community there. So for us, it's really about there's community everywhere, all around us, and so while the community of ticket buyers, whoever they may be, are extremely important and vital to our success and our health. We, at least in my mind, I think, okay, well, at the end of the day, we want to come up with a concert that's going to bring people in. It's going to be a box office success, and it would be very easy for us to just say, well, let's just get the most famous artists ever that are out there, and that we'll just do that over and over. But we have a responsibility to the field and to each other to make sure that, whether everybody in the audience understands it or not, that we are constantly pursuing the highest possible standards of excellence. And that's our responsibility to the field of artists, field of colleagues in the business, presenters and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that is definitely part of it. If you want to reach a certain community, if there's some community that for whatever reason we've identified as being important, then yes, we do try to program in ways that we think will be attractive to that community. And sometimes, it can be for specific reasons, like the Czech Republic. But a couple of years ago, India celebrated the 75th anniversary of its independence, for example. And so we built a weekend of concerts and events that were specifically aimed at drawing in an Indian audience. But we didn't expect them to come and hear a classical concert. We wanted to find programs that we thought would be meaningful and relevant to them. And so that's the responsibility we take on, which is how do we show up in the most authentic way for the communities that we're trying to serve.
Yeah.
I'd like to share about one of our PR clients. We do consulting for Lincoln Center. And as many of you may have watched over the last near 6 years, Lincoln Center has totally transformed itself. It's no longer in the same category as Carnegie Hall in serving in the same way. It's no longer core classical. And they have completely transformed their mission over this period in deciding that they're here to serve the community of New York. And New York is beyond the patrons and the people who live in the Upper West Side who can afford with disposable income to buy tickets at a high price. The idea is to break down the barriers and to do that both physically and on a practical level. In the 1960s, when Lincoln Center was being built and the whole San Juan Hill and this drama of this fancy building coming up, it pushed a lot of people in the community out, Black and Hispanics. And so obviously you know how it has transformed to where it is now today, but there's a wall, and there's discussions about breaking down this physical wall that separates Lincoln Center from seeing the projects behind it. And so it's an important part of this mission of the new leadership at Lincoln Center to break that barrier down, but to reflect programmatically what the community looks like. Instead of being core classical and bringing in orchestras like the London Philharmonic Orchestra and having these recitals, the mission is now, let's bring in hip hop, let's have a poet. Mahogany Brown is the poet laureate. Let's have a disco dance floor. So when you go to Lincoln Center in the summer, you'll see there's a disco dance floor in front of the fountain, and it's totally a different aesthetic, and everything's free. So no longer are the tickets hundreds of dollars, but it's choose what you pay, just like what Sphinx is, to choose what you pay to come to this conference. So it provides access for families to be able to come. So the number, 53% of the audiences that came last year are new audiences that have never been to Lincoln Center, and the diversification is extraordinary, and families can now come because they might not have been able to afford to come to a concert or to hire a babysitter, but if you're only paying $5 or nothing, you can bring your entire family. And in the summer, it's created an opportunity to really have vibrant programming, whereas before Lincoln Center didn't have that much going on in the summer. They had Midsummer Night's Swing, they had mostly Mozart Festival, and they've taken away those names because Mozart can be seen as elitist and exclusive, and so now it's just called the Festival Orchestra of Lincoln Center. And that Midsummer Night's Swing, they all still exist, they're just called Summer for the City, under the guise of Lincoln Center Presents. So it's a really exciting way to renew a mission, to break down the barriers, to open the audiences, to open the physical doors, as Mark was saying, because a lot of the programming is outside now. So I just wanted to share about that.
I'm reminded with the Sphinx Virtuosi, when we first started booking the Sphinx Virtuosi, and we had conversations with venues and presenters, it was always about what is familiar to their specific audiences and not what can Sphinx bring. And that conversation has now shifted. Venues weren't booking Sphinx Virtuosi because there wasn't a Mozart on there. And they would say that very specifically, you need to come with Mozart. You gotta have Beethoven. We've been fortunate for the past few years now to have works by all Black and Latino composers, and venues aren't pushing back on us. But I'm wondering, for artists who don't have the same voice as large as the Sphinx organization, like what is the advice for artists who wants to advocate for themselves on stage and bring it to someone's venue, whether it's Carnegie Hall, whether it's Zoellner, or while you're curating a program with the artists, that they stay true to themselves? Anybody?
I'll take a stab at that. I'll take a stab at that. It's a good question. I mean, I think there's a little bit of instinct involved from at least on the presenting side of what we think will work with the combination of artists and repertoire. There are different ways. I mean, anybody who is a presenter will know there are different ways that you can do some research and look at past sales and things like that. And there's a little bit of a science to coming up with programs that we think will be successful. It's maybe more of an art than a science. But I think something that I really believe is it's better to build from strength than to try to make your way back from something that didn't go over well, right? So it's not to say that you have to be safe all the time, but I think until an artist has a reliable following, then I think not to think about how am I mean, at the end of the day, you want to play for an audience and not then an empty house, right? So to not be a little bit realistic about what will attract the audience is missing the point a little bit. So to give one concrete example, this past season, or the season that we're in, I should say, the LA Philharmonic was our opening night concert with Gustavo Dudamel conducting. And typically this is a gala audience. This is the tuxedo and ball gown audience. A lot of them don't come back again until the next gala. So those programs in the past have traditionally been, fairly straightforward, De Cavalier, pictures at an exhibition, all the things that you would imagine. But with Gustavo, because he's such a supernova, we were able to present the complete ballet of Estancia by Gina Stero. I mean, a lot of people have performed the dance episodes, but this was the complete ballet with narrator and singer, and that was our main piece on opening night. It's extraordinary for us to be able to share that with our audience and to center a composer who is not a fixture in the concert hall and in that way, and that's something that you can do when you have that kind of pulpit almost. And so I think, not everyone, there's only one Gustavo Dudamel, right? And it's not to say that if you keep doing conservative programs that someday you'll also be a Gustavo Dudamel, but I think it's important to recognize that, if you keep building from strength and then you have an audience that trusts you and is going to follow you, then that's when you can start to share things that may be less familiar to audiences, and so it's finding that balance so that not every concert is just the hits and the known repertoire, but that there's enough that there might be something new, a little bit like the program that Charlotte was talking about, but something that is familiar and attractive and beloved that will get people excited to come.
Mark, does that change for you at the university level? Your students are coming in every 4 years as a different audience and different demographic that's constantly changing. How does that look from your perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting aspects is Lehigh, as a university, started off in 1865 as all white male school. It's totally different from then, right? And so the demographics for this university has changed dramatically, and it does continue. So one of the things I would say about working with artists who want to look at this kind of programming is actually having that conversation with a curator or a person who does the programming, or like myself as the executive director. Sometimes it might just take a little bit longer, or we have to just think creatively. So some examples. I have conversations with some folks, and we're going to do something that might be challenging or just something that my community is not used to, and we'll take 18 months possibly to have that where we're going to go, because we have to think a little bit more strategically and creatively. So part of the conversation is like, can we have some Zoom calls with key members of my community, so they can get involved and want to know about this program, and then those folks who are in the community who people trust, they will get the word out. And so that's part of the things I try to do is like, we can now use a lot of technology that we didn't have before. Can we get like some of the students to actually then interview you ahead of time too, so they understand what drove you for this conversation, what brought you to have this work? How do we also get you to then find other key folks in the community that might have other things that we can connect with, so we can have like a pre-show conversation with someone on our staff or someone in the community. So when I do this, it's actually, we try to build like a big thing around it. So it might be a pre-show lecture and conversation, have like a little, the show, and then have a post afterwards too. So we make it like a larger event, so that we start to gather more people coming to see this artist itself. So I would say those are some of the things that if you want to have those kind of programming, and some of the folks that you want to bring, you have to think, here are some options that we can do to really buff it out a little bit more, and that's what we try to do. I also will say this, I bring in things that make money, and I bring in things I know it's not gonna make money. But then I have a certain like percentage of things that I know I'm not gonna make any money, but then what we try to do is make the tickets a little bit more inexpensive. We work with our funders to help us understand this is part of what we wanna do. We talk to other partners in our university, say, hey, here are other groups, Student Life, or other places, and they help us bring in people to help cover those funds or bring in an audience for us.
Thank you. Charlotte, I would love to hear from you in terms of the artist perspective, but I want to also, we're going to open the floor for Q&A. If you're tuning in live, go to the app, 42 Degrees North, and then we have a microphone here and here for questions. I'll try to get 2 or 3 questions at the same time so we can get a lot of questions out the way. So if you have the questions, feel free to line up. Thank you. Charlotte, can you talk about, just quickly, authenticity with your artists and how you approach those conversations? Because you have the opportunity to sell them to Ab and to Mark, right? Talk about authenticity and ensuring that the programming that the artist wants to do is communicated properly, and that they're not like Sphinx having, back in the day, having to do Mozart and having to do Bach.
You mean the marketing or the programming of it?
Both, actually, the marketing and the programming of it. Or choose one.
Okay. Right now we have our pianist Songjin Cho, who's artist in residence at the Berlin Philharmonic. We look after him in the Americas. His general management has arranged a season-long residency for him at this premier orchestra. And in talking about the planning of his residency, the question was, what's authentic to you? What are you passionate about? And what do you want to present? There are 3 touch points in this residency. There's 2 concerts in the main hall with the Berlin Philharmonic, and then there's 1 concert that he very much was insistent on doing of one of his compatriots' works. Songjin Cho is from South Korea, and there's a up-and-coming composer named Dong-Hok Shin, and he's a protege of the great living composer Eun Suk Chin. And Dong-Hok is in his late 20s, early 30s, the same age as Songjin, and he's not known. And so Berlin Phil said, well, that's not, something that our audiences will recognize. We can't put it on the main stage. And so what he did was say, okay, how about on the main stage, we do 2 concertos, one that is a popular one, Beethoven Emperor Concerto, with Jaco Prussia, a great conductor, so that checks that off the list. And then the other was one, he wanted to do chamber music. And he said, can I do some chamber music in the small hall, but also chamber music in the big hall in some collaborative orchestral concerto way. And the idea was to do a lesser known concerto that included a collaborator from the Berlin Philharmonic, who of course are soloists in their own right, these principal players. So he chose Shostakovich Piano Concerto, Concerto No. 1 for piano and trumpet. So it was a great way to showcase, we have trumpet players in the room, a musician from the orchestra, their principal trumpet, and to have a collaborative approach on this. So it's not just a soloist comes for 3 concertos in the main hall and it's all about them. He wanted it to be integrative with an orchestra that has so many fantastic musicians. So that was the second concerto. Then the third date was in this smaller hall, and it was with the Karajan Academy, which was a really interesting way of introducing into the residency a component of young people, because these are the future musicians of great orchestras in the world. The Karajan Academy is the feeder into the Berlin Philharmonic, their training program. So he was able to get his friend's composition in there, Dong-Hok Shin. And then they also, of course, wanted something that he's known for. Songjin is known for having won 10 years ago the Chopin competition. And so they said, could you possibly consider Chopin 1? So that was a compromise. He's like, all right, I'll give it to them because you guys are introducing my compatriots' unknown work from an unknown person, and then you got the Chopin. So that program that happened last week in the Chamber Hall of Berlin Philharmonic was Chopin Piano Concerto No. 1, and then a work for small orchestra by Dong-Hok Shin. So he felt it was authentic to him. He had to go to bat. Your question of, is there push and pull? Yes, there's a lot of push and pull with the presenter and with the artist, but they found that common ground that checked off a lot of what would get people in the hall, but once you're there, you've learned about a new up-and-coming composer.
Thank you. We have questions here and here. Let's do 2 questions here and we'll try to address them very quickly.
Great. Hi, my name is Glenn Griffith, Vice President with the Dallas Symphony over EDI and Social Impact. Thank you all for being here today. My question is specifically for Mark. In talking about community and how you connect with community and have meetings to help inform your programming, can you share a little bit of exactly how you go about doing that to gather that insight and that information?
So Mark will do community in a second, and then what's the second question here?
Hi, my name is Benny Jun. I am a freshman at Miami University studying emerging technology in business and design with a minor in music performance.
Woo.
So I was
Let's go.
So I was wondering, what is the most challenging part of your job, and what skills do you recommend that people develop in order to get into this line of work?
Thank you.
So community, let me just give you an example. There's a program that we did a couple of years ago, and we actually are bringing it back, called Traveling While Black. It's a virtual reality installation created by Roger Ross Williams. It's a replica of Ben Chili Bowl. So when I brought it in a couple of years ago, I was a little hesitant because I said, oh no, CRT, and I'm gonna get in trouble, I'm gonna get fired after being at the university for a year. So what I did was I built a network of folks to make sure that if I was gonna get fired, the people in the community weren't gonna let that happen. So I talked to all of the pastors who had influence in the community, and I told them about this project. And what I asked them was, what would you like for us to do? This is what the project is. I explained it to them. And I said, but I don't want just to have it in Lehigh. I want to do something within the community. The idea they had was, why don't we have actually conversations called Travel While Black and something else? So we had conversations called Travel While Black and the art, Travel While Black up the corporate ladder, Travel While Black, co-pilots and co-conspirators, Traveling While Black and gay, Traveling While Black and disabled. And those conversations were hosted at churches and community centers. And they said, talk to this person, they will help you find the speakers for this one. Talk to this person, and that's what it is. I did not find the speakers. I trusted the community to find those speakers for me. So then when they said, oh, you are trusting us, I said, yes. I'm a content expert, and you are the context experts. And I said, we need the people who can bring the things in context. And when you start to show that to the community, that you trust them as the experts of their daily lived experience, they will then start to trust you. But it's a give and take, and it takes a while. That took us basically like 12 to 16 months of conversations before we actually had that program created. And then I hired a Black-owned marketing company to actually help us with the last part two. So that's what I would just tell you to do, is like you really have to take a little bit more time. But now things will be faster because they trust me in the very beginning. And it wasn't just folks who were Black, I also worked in the Hispanic community too, and so it was bringing all those people together through those conversations.
Can you talk about your pathway into this line of work and advice for the young lady who asked the question over here?
Sure. Well, the first question I think you asked is, what was the hardest part of the job? And I think, at least in this current job, the hardest thing is having to say no. Because there are so many incredible musicians and ensembles out there, and we only have so many nights available. So that is a very, very difficult part of my job. And maybe a more serious answer is maintaining relationships, because then how do you choose? You know, it's not about, I think a lot of people, maybe project onto us, oh, it's Carnegie Hall, it's the best of the best, and the people who get presented, somebody in the ivory tower in Carnegie Hall has said, oh, you're better than all those other people, and it's just not really true. I mean, we do endeavor to bring the most compelling and the best in all kinds of music, but I think, if we had to say what rises at the top, it's really about relationships. And so that's a really, a big part of my job and a big challenge of my job, which is to respond to everybody. I don't always get it right because I get a lot of email, but I really do endeavor to respond to absolutely everybody and to get back to them and to, engage in a very, a deep and meaningful way. Just to say very briefly, my pathway to getting to this place, I started off as a musician. A violist by training, but even that was a little bit circuitous because my parents are immigrants. A career in the arts wasn't really something that seemed plausible to them, and so by the time, through various school programs and things like that, music came into my life. I was 11 years old. I started directly on viola, so any string player in the room can just imagine by the time you're 16, 17 years old and applying for college, a conservatory education wasn't really, on the cards for me. My college degree is in economics, but I kept playing, kept kept the dream alive, and eventually did find my way into a career in music. But because I think I had these other muscles that I had developed, along the way I just became curious about not just making music, but the business of making music. And as a friend of mine puts it, through a series of battlefield promotions where somebody goes down and I'm just willing to step up to the plate, I found my way through the career. And the story's a little bit longer than that, but we don't have too much time. But I'm happy to speak with you offline. But I tried my best to educate myself along the way. It took a lot of personal investment. There are lots of resources out there, and I made a lot of mistakes. And you have to have a lot of resilience, I think, and perseverance to try to bounce back from those mistakes. And I think what we learn from our failures is just as much as is just as important as the successes that we have. And so here I am, just trying my best. So.
We'll take a couple questions here, and there was another young lady that was in line here. But one thing that you said, the hardest part of your job is saying no, and I just want to encourage everyone, no just means not yet, right? So everyone will hear no, no, no. You'll get to the yes. So it's just not right now.
That's a good point. Sir.
Question and then question.
Hi, I'm the president of Chamber Music Cincinnati. And I have a question for all of you, but two things that Mark and Charlotte touched on. Why are people so risk adverse, to the point you were making when I came into the room, Charlotte? We started 15 years ago as a regular part of our series every year of having black representation among our artists. Coming out of COVID, we really doubled down. In the last 4 seasons, 80%, 80%, 50%, and 40% of the ensembles that we presented had black representation. And there was skepticism on our board and in our audiences in the beginning about how was that going to work. But we built audience every year for the last 4 years. And on December 10th, we had by the way, we have 7 significant chamber music presenters in a city of 300,000 people. And on December 10th, we had the largest audience ever for any of those series in at least the last 20 years, and probably ever. The only people to sell out the 550-seat concert hall where we present our audiences, which I think might be bigger than 2 of the 3 halls at Carnegie Hall. People give up too easily. If you just looked at the first year's results, that wouldn't have worked. What is it that you see that's keeping people from doing that? And what strategies and tactics do you see people employing that work?
Thank you for that question. And then we'll get to that one. And second question.
Hi, friends. My name is
Hello.
Brittany Germain, and thank you so much for your time. I am the program director of Tati. Really quick question. How do you find the balance in responding to the political and social issues of our country while maintaining your identity as institution, and whatever tips you can give us as we're all trying to evolve and respond and such? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. You have the mic?
Yes, I'll address not the second question, but the first question, and leave these institutional leaders to answer the second. Hi, John. Nice to see you. Thank you for your commitment to what you do. It's extraordinary, and thank you for presenting Randall Gooseby last season. He had a great time, and he's looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks in Cincinnati. I think that people are afraid of what they don't see, and what is put in front of them is what is their comfort zone. And for 250 plus years, it has been a certain way. And what I love about this post-COVID world, in what we've seen, it's been a challenging 5+ years. And many institutions like the Cincinnati Symphony and your organization, John, have been committed to this long before it was a movement. That's how we know it's truly authentic, is that we are encouraged to step in and to change things because it's been too long where it has been a certain way. So it takes time to gain trust and to open audiences to something that they're not used to seeing. But to answer your second question, how do we do it, is we need to be committed to a foundation of excellence. And this is not about just putting people of color or gender to check off a list. This is about having a view that we are committed to reflecting what the world actually looks like, and our basis is excellence. And that's what Sphinx stands for, because we're not here, if anything, without excellence. So when we have that bedrock of excellence and you are introducing Randall Gooseby or Sheku Kana Mason, these are extraordinary artists, and they are undoubtedly, as you see, blowing your audiences away, and they'll say, wow, I just really enjoyed that performance. I didn't expect to. And then you gain their trust, and the next time they'll be like, oh yeah, well, I know that this is gonna be great. I've never heard of them, and I probably wouldn't have them in my Spotify list. But that's what we do. We wanna reflect what the community looks like. We wanna gain the trust of our audience, and we want to expose them to what they aren't aware of.
I would just say, ooh, hello. One of the things that my team and I talked about was we build in 10 to 20% of everything we do is some risk. Prior to, like I said, my arrival, we had 0% risk, and then we didn't build any audience. And the pandemic said, oh, I said, yeah, if you actually did experiments every year and you learn from those experiments, then you have quicker muscles. And that's what I learned through my whole career. So one of the things I would just tell everyone, if you don't have any kind of risk that you're doing in what you're doing in your organizations, either as a performer or as a presenter, then you should. Because then when something happens, you have the flexibility in those muscles to actually learn how to pivot really quickly. And so for my team, that's what we do. We reevaluate every single August. We have a retreat. We go through the last year and we talk about what were the things that we did was a risk, and what worked, and what we want to continue, and what we want to get rid of. But we want to learn every time, because I said we're in a university. University students, they learn, so why do we have to stop learning? So we try to do it all the time. And so when I bring in like these kind of weird things that people say, that's kind of weird, and all of a sudden people say, I like that. I brought in Travel While Black 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, and people said that was kind of weird, and now everyone said that's great, so we're bringing it back next year for the 250th anniversary of our country to show the true history of the fullness of our country. Folks said, yes, bring that back, because that was a risk we took and people love it. So do more of the risk. And talk about the politics. Yes, sometimes you have to do certain things and you have to make a statement. And so we are bringing, like I said, certain programming because it's important. And as Charlotte said, it's about excellence. And that's what we look at, is what represents the full excellence of our country.
Have anything to add before we close this session out?
I think for us, to answer the second question about how do you address political and social issues, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier in the session, which is, we really do spend a lot of time speaking with one another on our team about what are the issues that are on our minds, and if they're on our minds, then there's a good chance they're on other people's minds as well. But what's really important to us is that we present them, as questions, as things for us to think about and engage with, and really try not to let too much of our own sort of feelings or beliefs on those topics through. We don't want to lecture the audiences or tell them what to think. We want to hopefully invite them to reflect on the topic. So it's a tricky balance. We don't always get it right. We sometimes hear from audiences, why did you do that? Or I didn't come to Carnegie Hall to be lectured or something like that. So it's not to say that we always get it right, but that's a very important value that we have when we take on something that might have might not necessarily polarizing, but have two different sides or many different points of view.
Thank you. Well, friends, our time has come to an end, unfortunately. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Ab. And thank you all for coming.